Salut și bine ați venit la o nouă ediție a ZF IT Generation. Sunt Adrian Săcelanu, jurnalist ZF, iar astăzi vom discuta despre ecosistemul de startup-uri tech și despre rolul pe care fondurile de investiții corporate îl pot juca în această lume și vom face acest lucru alături de Suleiman Arabiat, care este Senior Investment Manager în cadrul Elevator Ventures și mentor în cadrul InnovX-BCR. Vom purta evident această discuție în limba engleză. Hello Suleiman, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello Adrian, thank you so much for hosting me as well.
I think we discussed a little bit until we reached this moment when we had this interview. We had a lot of discussions about this in Bucharest. We interacted as part of the InnovX community. So thank you again for joining us today. And let's start by talking a little bit about Elevator Ventures and about you. So share with us some key facts.
Absolutely, we're very happy. I mean, happy to share more, happy to tell you more about our place in the industry as a CVC. So I will maybe begin anyway by giving a quick intro about the fund. We are the corporate VC of Raiffeisenbank International out of Vienna. We are residing also in Vienna. We've been around for 4 years now. We have done to date 14 investments, hopefully about to do our 15th actually. And our track record also includes 3 exits already, which is quite, let's say, a surprising or a positively surprising thing for a fund to happen in the first 3-4 years of their lifetime. But it was maybe a function of many good things that came together at the same time. Many stars aligned in a good way for us. So that said, we are an early stage fund. We invest typically between 1 to 3 million euros. That's our initial ticket size, comfortably allowing us to come in at a Series A round, or typically at Series A rounds as they are defined, which anyway, since the definitions are loose, I will just say that we only come in post-traction. We don't do pre-traction deals or idea stage or very early seed. And we don't shy away from a Series B or even potentially a Series C if the deal is too good. Finally, as a fund, we do have CEE mandate. So we do look at the Central and Eastern European region altogether, which is also the footprint of RBI. Simply because this is where we probably can offer some value beyond the money, beyond the investment itself. That value, obviously, and the first point of it is the connection to RBI and our many network banks and their strong presence. But that also actually is also our personal network in these countries, where we hope to help the teams, at least with some advice, potentially some intros, as any VC would do. And maybe finally, a good point to mention is that this is a return-driven VC. So the bank looks at Elevator Ventures as let's say, an asset class within the bank, and not necessarily just as a tactical fund to address problem solving. This is a broader investment fund, and first and foremost agenda or first and foremost objective is the IRR of the fund. I've joined the team for a year and a half, or I've been with the team now for a year and a half, almost. I've worked with another CVC prior to this one at Arab Bank out of the Middle East. And I've also worked with a seed stage fund called Oasis 500, a Middle Eastern fund that is. And prior to that, I actually am a graduate of ASE. I did my master's there. And I worked in engineering for a few years before I joined the venture capital industry.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction and for sharing some key information about you and the CVC. I was wondering if you are investing exclusively in fintech startups, in fintech projects, or you are looking beyond this if it's a good deal.
That's a great point. I mean, simply because we are the CVC of a bank, the let's say most obvious sector to address is financial technology. However, if you would have asked someone what fintech was 10 years ago, a lot of the discussion would have revolved around payments potentially, and some challenger activity, some lending activity that is out there. That landscape have shifted, actually shifted a lot since then. So payments are no longer, let's say, the most sophisticated, or let's say the most difficult thing to tackle in payments when it comes to infrastructure and so on. There were leapfrogs anyway happening. So it was already addressed. And this is where our mandate when it comes to financial technology, we obviously would look at the core fintech, as you would call it, so payments and lending at the core. But we are quite interested in the beyond banking angle or beyond pure financial technology solutions. And that, in that sense, we have done a deal in Bulgaria called Cloudcart. It's an e-commerce platform, Shopify-like. We have done a logistics platform called Bird with a Y, BYRD. That's an e-fulfillment and logistics. We're about, hopefully, to do a data analytics investment, which, if you would take all of these, we've also done a prop tech called Bob W out of Estonia, out of the Nordics, Estonia, Finland, and these countries. And if you would put all of these together, you find that we look at fintech and then fintech adjacent, if you may call it. And that is how broad we look at the sector.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about the role of a CVC in the current ecosystem, and also maybe you could share with us how do you see how are you perceived in the market, because in this ecosystem, as I see it, we see a lot of strong players, a lot of egocentric players, and a lot of strong opinions about what should a corporate do and not do. There are different opinions about this. So I'm curious, how do you see it and what did you experience so far?
I mean, maybe to address it heads on, CVCs generally, and I would say this even though I work for a CVC, they generally don't make sense, especially for very big corporates. Simply because if you are a corporate and you're looking at this as, let's say, a solution to your innovation troubles, you might as well just have a very strong M&A team, a technology M&A team, and acquire all the technologies that you need. And then in that sense, you would have mature, ready solutions to deploy. But then if you are going to go into CVC from an asset class perspective, then that's a completely different game, because you're basically saying, well, my revenue streams will be complemented by revenue from a high risk asset, which is VC in this case. Plus, obviously, if you can attach then mandates to that. So you can say, of course, we will also use this as a bit of a trailblazer for our corporate teams. And that then the burden of proof becomes very, very, let's say, tilted towards the teams within the corporate and the corporate itself in cultivating the culture that allows for the teams, the people who work in the corporate, to explore the innovations that the CVC would bring. Maybe to clarify and to add a caveat to what I earlier, the bold statement of saying they don't generally make sense, is that if you would look at potentially two sectors, there would be two very good ones actually to look at CVC in, which is probably, and I come from that, so it's a self-serving statement, the banking sector, and then I would assume also the biotech sector or big pharma and the advances in these areas. And these two sectors, simply because the incumbents, banks and big pharma alike, and the biotechs of the world, they are strong in a sense that they are not, let's say, bringing the market, let's say, backwards. They are actually safety valves in their market, especially banks in this case. The well-established and well-reputable banks, the likes of RBI, are anyway a few, and these are the big ones in almost every geography. And these banks basically are not holding the market back. Maybe they need a bit of a push, because as every corporate, there is a lot of inertia that you need to overcome and build the momentum with and against in some cases to get innovation. But at the end of the day, you get there with them and you get there safely, because at the end of the day, banks are here mostly, and for the most part, as the safeguard or the guardians of the financial system, or a very crucial part of the guardians of the financial system. So I'll just close the statement and say, for the most part, CVCs maybe are heavily challenged, and they are also not very welcome on many cap tables. However, banking CVCs, pharma CVCs, if managed well, and if you keep the return mandate the top, then it can be the flip side, right? It can be actually a super strong opportunity for the corporate and also for the market. And that, of course, doesn't, I'm not here excluding any of the big names. Actually, the most successful CVC, to the extent of my knowledge, is Intel Capital. And that's a CVC in the technology space as well, which again, it's more about how you manage it, how do you deploy, how do you make money, and then you build the culture in your corporate to interface with this spearhead, let's say.
I think it's a great example, Intel Capital, because it was so big that also had investment in Romania, if I remember correctly. Now, extending a little bit the discussion, I'm curious, how do you see the ecosystem in the region, and how are you navigating it? How do you see other CVCs, VCs, startups? How are you looking at everything?
I mean, it's a great question, but it's also a broad one. So I will maybe take it into the opportunity itself, right? So the opportunity comes with the challenge. The challenge of the CEE is that it is a region that is, in some senses, fragmented. So politically, it is fragmented. Obviously, the term balkanization didn't come from a vacuum. There are many smaller states with their own local laws, their own customs, cultures, economic setups that are different from each other. The EU obviously provides a very powerful umbrella to connect the economies. Nonetheless, it's still challenging, obviously. Whether it is the language, I mean, at the very least, it's the language barrier, right? And in many cases, the languages do not overlap. So, in this sense, whenever you want to access one market as a startup, you will always find it a bit difficult to localize. This goes a bit against the scalability discourse, let's say, that is highly encouraged in a VC setup or in a VC investment. Nonetheless, that challenge is the opportunity. Less competition for sure. It also means that there will be many local players trying to come up with different ideas, different solutions. It also offers, obviously, the possibility of localizing copycat models. So what worked in the US, if you take it word for word and if you copy it, line by line into Romania, for example, it will not work. But if you understand the model quite well, and then you adapt it and you build, let's say, to the local processes, to the local economy, then the chances that this works and scales is there. The challenge of scaling beyond Romania remains, but nonetheless, you would have at least a decent head start, a decent market head start. But even then, with the right valuation and with the right setup and the right progress, the possibility of you being consolidated into a larger holding, or into a big company coming into the region and wanting to enter, let's say, and then you would basically be the option of buy or build, and you would be the buy in this case as an investment, as a company. All of these, if they come together at the right time, there is a chance for an exit. That said, the VC activity, of course, is still nascent, if to put it nicely. There are many attempts, and there were many successful ones, but nonetheless, it's still nascent in a sense that you can see the symptoms of a nascent ecosystem. A lot of money at the very early stages, a few spread very good exits, or sometimes sporadic, really, really high exits, and some very good stories to tell, but not a consistent, handshake to handshake, like over the stages of a VC value chain. So that consistency anyway is elusive. It's not developed in many parts of the world. The contrary, it's just really the hallmark of a couple of highly developed systems, like that of Silicon Valley, like that you can find in the northeast of the US with the biotechs, maybe the UK as well, and to a certain extent France and Germany, and Asian markets. You can see hallmarks of it here and there, but this consistency is what can be, or what is the way you can describe a mature ecosystem. That maturity is not there yet. Again, a challenge and an opportunity. So, with every challenge comes an opportunity, and we are investing ourselves in the opportunity. We basically hope to overcome these hurdles, working with the likes of InnovX and many other partners in the region. We leverage the footprint of the strong institution that we basically come from, which is RBI, Raiffeisen Bank, and the RBI network. And then we try our best to to catch the best in breed, let's say, that is coming out from this highly sophisticated region as well. I mean, if you look at maybe at final advantage point, I would just say the talent pool that comes out of the CEE is exemplary anyway, and that is maybe very best exemplified at, I think, in Microsoft, the second highest spoken language is probably Romanian, if I'm not mistaken, or third. Or so. I read a statistic here somewhere, and then Polish was the most spoken in SAP or something like that. So you can also tell that the technology talent pool is there. And obviously, it's already exposed to the big tech scene, the global big tech scene. And with that comes also an advantage to the region.
Thank you for sharing this. I was wondering, you mentioned InnovX at some point, and as I said earlier, we met a few times in this ecosystem. We were part of a lot of events. You also had some, let's say, private discussions with companies that joined the program. So first of all, I would like to ask you, how did you end up to cooperate with InnovX? Maybe it's something that one wouldn't expect because you are from a CVC from Raiffeisen. InnovX-BCR is supported by Erste, so two competitors. So maybe you can share some of the path that brought you together, and how was the experience, and if any startups maybe caught your attention.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe I will tackle the first one first and say, when it comes to competition, I mean, obviously Raiffeisen and Erste, they are competitors when it comes to market share as banks. But when it comes to CVC activity, at the end of the day, there is very little competition, especially also in the region we are addressing, right? It's better to collaborate rather than to compete, because at the end of the day, a financial technology firm let's say in this region would need and would want to work with almost every financial player, not just these two big names. There are also other big names, and other smaller and local names that are stronger. So if you would come and if you would approach this with a competition exclusivity mindset, everyone loses. It's a lose-lose. It's not even a win-lose. That said, of course, working with InnovX has been a pleasure. It's a great team. The team itself have built a capacity that they got sponsored by a large and respectable institution such as BCR, Erste. But that said, also InnovX is in of itself, let's say, a well-structured team that is building multi-thronged approaches anyway. And that, if I understood also historically, I think they also work and collaborated a bit with Raiffeisen Bank Romania. So, and if I'm not mistaken, also with Bank of Transylvania and with some other local players. And this is exactly what I'm trying to say. When it comes to entrepreneurship and innovation, it makes little sense that you come and say, especially at the early stages, right, that you say, we are in exclusivity mode. The exclusivity mode would be a lose-lose formula. That said, of course, I was very happy to participate. The activities were very well structured, and it again just speaks highly of the activity that is happening. I mean, I used to live in Romania 12 years ago. Entrepreneurship was maybe a less common word that you would hear around. Maybe just a few student organizations would talk about it, and some NGO activity, but nothing really substantial. However, now it has accelerated, and you can see that evident by the sophistication and level of investors, and obviously the sophistication and level of the entrepreneurs themselves and their companies. If you look, there are a few hallmarks of a nascent ecosystem, and one of them is that cap tables are typically not that well structured. So if you compare Romania 5-6 years ago, and again, this is not scientific, right? But if you see some of the cap tables we have seen 6 or 7 years ago, and then you compare them to what's happening now in 2022 to 2023, there is maturity in the ecosystem that is on an upward trajectory. So this was very intriguing. Maybe your last questions, did we identify any good targets? Not yet, because anyway, we are invested in the ecosystem. We have a company, we have an investment in Thinkware, one of the local fintechs, and we do also have an eye set on a couple of others in the ecosystem anyway. And then through InnovX, I think I have met 5 or 6 very strong teams that are still very nascent for our mandate. So we keep a radar. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a very patient game. So we keep them on the radar. We look at them as they mature and hopefully gain some traction. And then, yes, they might be potential investment targets.
For the end of our discussion, I'd like to ask you, how do you expect this year to go on? And we hear a lot of discussions, we see a lot of reports about challenges in the economy, a lot of discussions about recession. We see also some headwinds in the tech sector, a lot of big companies doing layoffs, things that we didn't see for a lot of time in this space. So I'm wondering, what do you expect for this year in the region? What is your agenda on your higher topics priority, let's say?
I mean, that's of course, let's say, a kind of a forecasting question. So everyone has a lot of, everyone has opinions, and that includes myself and our fund. And we are a bit more, of course, conservative when it comes to let's say, assuming the worst. At the end of the day, VC is a long-term game. We are not cyclical in a sense that one year affects us and the other doesn't. To the contrary, it's the investment periods are anyway 3 and 4 years typically in a VC. So you can even be in and out of one particular downside event within the same investment period. And then anyway, as your companies and your portfolio grows, it is the nature of the beast that some will fail even in the best market conditions, and that some will succeed even in the worst. That's actually what you are building your portfolio towards. But given the situation, again, challenge and opportunity, right? So there are many challenges, and I don't want to downplay what's happening, but I think I will quote, the Modaran, who's a very famous economist, saying, and that the problem is not the recession itself. The problem is the predictability of the macroeconomic indicators, so like inflation and all of the other lagging indicators. And if you can predict consistently that inflation is 10% every single month or every year or whichever, then if your predictions are correct every single month, that means that at least you are geared to deal with what's happening very well. And that also means that you are not missing anything in the market, in a sense that you will be surprised by it. So it's avoiding surprise in the forecast that you always try to do. You try to get as close to the reality as possible, and then the reality itself, even if it's a downside event, somehow you have accounted for it, or you would be accounting for it. And I think that's a very good and accurate description. It's so far the Eurozone, at least, or the EU as well, have managed to predict the inflation that was happening and to also keep track of it. So this single digit, in some cases, of course, was double digit and unpredictable, but in most cases it was late single digits. And I would assume here, and again, pure assumption, conjecture, that at least this keeps things under control. Doesn't mean they are good, doesn't mean that they are, let's say, super impressive, but at the very least, they are predictable, and predictability allows you to deal with it. Already, everyone is instructing their portfolios and working very closely with the teams to cut the costs as much as possible, extend runways. This is across the board, everywhere you look. Spend only on growth, otherwise try your best to work towards a cost cut. So just to maybe highlight this particular point, opportunity in layoffs. Of course, it is an unfortunate thing. It is a negative thing. Layoffs are never good, but there is always an opportunity in every challenge, and this is how we do it. It is when it's across the board and when it's indiscriminate layoffs. That also includes obviously a lot of the talent. That basically that is good, very good talent, but then at the end of the day, they were made redundant. These particular individuals have the network, have the experience, and they would typically consider starting their own or maybe joining some of the good ones that are already out there in the market and some of the earlier ones. And this is a good option. We would rather invest in it. So even again, as we say, there is a lot of challenge. The market is not in, let's say, its best and optimal condition. Nonetheless, as a VC, since this is the long term, it's a long term paradigm anyway. and long shots as well. So we would come in and consider this a very good opportunity in the coming years, especially that also a lot of funds were raised last year and the year before. So there is a lot of dry powder in the markets, and that allows for decent levels of investment to continue, potentially with more of a down-to-earth, realistic approach to how quickly can companies scale, how well and how much should they be burning their investments towards growth. And yeah, we are all eyes and ears, and everything is open. So we are ourselves open, very much actually open to business, and looking forward to see what will happen in this year on a positive note.
Great points and a great discussion full of data and insights. Thank you very much for joining us today, Suleiman.
Thank you, Adrian, for hosting. Hopefully we'll see you soon in Bucharest.
I'm pretty sure we are going to meet again and discuss again at the show about what's happening in the startup ecosystem in the Central and Eastern Europe. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. Take care.
Aceasta a fost ediția de astăzi a ZF IT Generation. Vă mulțumim pentru că ne-ați urmărit și vă așteptăm și la edițiile următoare. La revedere!